This week is Parshas Vayeira, and we continue to learn about Avraham Avinu and the Asor Nisyonos Shenisnasa. But at the very beginning of the Parsha, we learn about Avraham Avinu that sits al Pesach Habayis kechoim hayoim, and he sees three people walking out there, v'yoretz lekrosam, the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim. And Chazal teach us that a Kodesh Baruch Hu comes to be mekayim the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. Gedoyle Hachnasas Orchim, Yoise mekabolas pnei hashchina. And it's just shocking to think of it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to visit Avraham Avinu, and as if Avraham Avinu tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, could you wait a few minutes because I'm busy right now, so I'll be right back. And he's busy with Hachnasas Orchim. Sometimes it happens to me. People are sitting in my house, and another person knocks on the door, and he has an appointment, and I must apologize and say, wait a few minutes, there are people inside, or wait a few minutes, I'm busy. But a Kodesh Baruch Hu comes to visit Avraham, and Avraham apologizes, and he says, take a few minutes, because, I see some people out there, and I have Hachnasas Orchim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, what? What did you say? Did I hear right? And Avraham Avinu says, Rabbeinu Shalom, but it's your Torah, and you told me that I have a mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim. And Chazal say, Gedoyle Hachnasas Orchim Yoisem Mekabolas Pnei Hashchina. So today we will be discussing briefly the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim and maybe Bikur Cholim as well. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Makayim Bikur Cholim, and Avraham Avinu is busy with Hachnasas Orchim. The Rambam writes, Perek Yud Daled Melchas Aval Alocha Aleph, that there is a group of mitzvahs which are defined the Gemilas Chasodim Bigufo. There are two different types of chesed. Person does chesed with his money, and that is called tzedakah. And you support many causes: tzedakah laniyim, Talmud Torah, Hachnasas Kala, Binyan Beis HaKnesses. But then there's Gemilas Chasodim Begufoi. So how many mitzvahs do you recall which are essentially chesed, but it's not about your money, but rather about your acts and your deeds? Let's hear. How many mitzvahs do you know of this nature? What? Levoya. Levoya Sachai. Scoring a living man. And? Levoya Sameis. And? Obviously, Hachnasas Orchim. And? Obviously, Bikur Cholim. What else? Nichum Avelim. What else? A happy one? L'sameach chosn v'kala. So all these mitzvahs that Rambam writes are mitzvahs midrabanan, medivrei soifrim. But they're all included in the mitzvah of yohavto l'reachu kamocha. And many ask, seems to be a contradiction, menei ubei, torch chedei dibber, in the very same halacha. If these mitzvahs are v'yahavto l'reachu kamocha, obviously they should be min haTorah. So why does the Rambam write their mitzvahs midrabanan? So there's a concept which we define, mitzvahs derabanan sheyesh lehem ikar min haTorah. And let me explain. The chiddush of the Rambam is that v'yahavto l'reachu kamocha is not only about your attitude, your emotions, and your feelings. It's not love everyone in your heart. It is you need to act out on your love of every other Jew. Leheitev mabrius. You need to make people happy. You need to give a helping hand when people are in need, and especially in desperation. That is the Agdora of Yehavto l'reacho kamoich. But a person could do nice things in 1,000 different ways. So Chazal come along and they say, we want you to be mekayim v'yehavto l'reacho kamoich in these ways. And Chazal dictate to us how to be mekayim v'yehavto l'reacho kamoich. Beker cholim, Hachnasas Orchim, Nicham Avelim, Simchas Chosa v'Kala. And therefore, when a person engages in any of these mitzvahs, he is mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa v'yehavto l'reacho kamoich. If he abstains from these mitzvahs, he's not mevatla mitzvah d'oraisa, because he still has 1,000 other ways to make people happy. Ploini Almoini never goes to Biker Cholim, never goes to Necham Avelim. He doesn't like chasana music, so he never goes to chasanas. But whenever there's a chamsin, a hot day, he opens a table downstairs on the street, and he has a big jug of cold lemonade, and he offers a cold drink to passerbys. He's mekayim v'yehavto l'reacho kamoich. So the fact that he's not mevatla cholim and he's not machnas orchim doesn't mean he's mevatla mitzvah d'oraisa, because he's mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa in other ways. But if he is machnas orchim, he's mekayim not only a mitzvah d'rabbanon, a mitzvah d'oraisa as well. And I'll give you another example. There's a machlekes Rambam and Ramban whether tefillah is a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'rabbanon. And the machlekes is based on a Gemara in Tanis the Beis Amud Aleph. Va'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem. Ezuhi avodah shebelev le'ovdoi b'chol levavchem zu tefillah. So the Rambam understands this the Gemara as is, Parshas. Ez avodah shebelev zu tefillah. So avadetem Hashem Elokeichem means davening. Chai avodim l'spara b'kol yom. The Ramban disagrees. And the Ramban says, "V'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem" is much broader than tefillah. It is avodas Elokim. It means that any mitzvah that you do should be l'shem shemayim, belev sholem, with proper kavanah, and it is a mitzvah klolis. And both the Rambam and Ramban agree that the mitzvahs klolios are not part of the number Taryag. Because there are many mitzvahs, and it's again and again that the Torah tells us, keep Torah, keep the mitzvahs. Telchu b'derech eitz hachayim. So according to the Ramban, v'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem is not about one specific mitzvah. It is about the entire package. Your avodas Hashem should be b'kol levov u'b'kol ma'od, with proper kavanah. And therefore, according to the Ramban, tefillah is not a mitzvah d'oraisa. Reb Chaim Brisker, Grach ala Rambam, Hilchas Tefillah, Perek Dalet. I'm just quoting one line and not the entire discussion. Reb Chaim says, according to the Ramban, chiyuv tefillah is midrabanon, aval inyono v'kiyumo min haTorah. Chiyuv is midrabanon. Inyona v'kiyuma. What does that mean? Inyona v'kiyuma min haTorah. And I say that Ramban can't ignore a Gemara. Ezui avodah shebelev zu tefillah. The Ramban definitely agrees that v'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem means tefillah, but not only tefillah. It means 100 other things as well. And therefore the Ramban says, when you daven, of course you're mekayim the mitzvah v'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem le'ovdei b'chol levavchem. That's tefillah. But if you don't daven, you're not necessarily mevatel this mitzvah, because you still could be mekayim the mitzvah in 100 other ways. With Kriya Shema, with Birchas HaTorah, with Talmud Torah, with Tefillin, and with Tzitzis, and with many, many other mitzvahs. They're all included in V'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem. So Tefillah, according to the Ramban, is similar to Hachnasas according to the Rambam. When you engage in tefillah, you're mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa. When you're machnas orchim, you're mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa. But if you abstain from these mitzvahs, you're not mevatla mitzvah d'oraisa as long as you still are mekayim this mitzvah in other ways. So on one hand, all these mitzvahs, gemilas chasodim begufoi, are a mitzvah d'oraisa. But each one specifically is not a chiyuv min haTorah, because the chiyuv min haTorah you could be mekayim in many other ways. Let's go into details. Who's familiar with the Sefer Ahavas Chesed? So let me share with you a feeling, what is so special about the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim lived in a day and age of many Gedolim. Every day and age has many Gedolim. Hundreds. But some Gedolim really stand apart. And the Chofetz Chaim was special. What was special about him? Was he the biggest goen of his age? Who could know? Did anyone put them all to test? Was he the biggest tzaddik of his age? Besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu? No one could know. Ki odem yireh la'einayim, v'elakim yireh la'levav. He definitely was huge. What was unique about the Chofetz Chaim, whatever he did in his lifetime is only when he was thoroughly convinced that this is tzorech haklal, and this is the call of the time. So the Chofetz Chaim didn't write sform on any mesechta. He could. He was a Godel B'Yisrael. But he said, there are so many sform in every mesechta. Do we really need another one? We have the Mashon, the Malama, the Pnei Yeshua, the Sfasemis, and so many other sform. When he wrote the Mishnah Berurah, the first volume he printed was Chelek Gimel, Hilchos Shabbos, not Chelek Aleph and Beis. And he writes that you can't keep Shabbos without knowing Hilchos Shabbos. You can't keep Shabbos without knowing the halachas. He wrote Ahavas Chesed when he saw that people don't appreciate enough the mitzvah of tzedukah and chesed. He wrote a sefer Machne Yisrael. Does anybody know what the Machne Yisrael is? It's one of his most fascinating sforim. Yes. For Jewish kids that were drafted into the Russian army by force, and usually they were in the army till age 45, and those were the Kantonistim. And the Chofetz Chaim wrote a sefer dedicated to those Jewish soldiers, teaching them how to do their best with kashrus, with Shabbos, because that was the call of the time. So whatever the Chofetz Chaim did, he did only what he really felt is tzorech ador, it's the call of the times, and tzorech of Klal Yisrael. And that makes the Chofetz Chaim so special. Anyway, in Ahavas Chesed, he has a fascinating comment. Chazal teach us twice in Shas, Yom HaChov Chesed, Kedushim Pei Beis, Kim Avrom Avinu, Kol HaTorah Kula Ad Shelo Nitno. But there's only one mitzvah which the Torah goes into specifics. What exactly did Avrom Avinu do? And that is Hachnasas. No other mitzvah do we learn how did he do, not only what he did. V'yashkem Avrom b'boker, he davened shachas. The Torah doesn't even say what he davened. Chazal say he davened shachas. But Hachnasas Orchim, the Torah goes into details. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, that means what we should learn from Avrom Avinu, not only the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim, but how to perform Hachnasas Orchim. And he has a list, a fascinating list. But before we go to the Chofetz Chaim, let's give cover to the Rishonim. Source number one is Sefer Vayeira LeRabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is best known for which Sefer? What is the most famous Sefer Rabbeinu Yonah? Sha'ar Tshuva. Was the Rabbeinu Yonah a mashgiach, or he also was a Rosh Hashiva? Was he only a Musar person? Was he also a Lamdan? Who knows? Was he a Lamdan or just a tzaddik like the mashgichim in the yeshivas? There are many mashgichim that are geweit gedolim. I don't want to offend the mashgiach of this yeshiva. I'm sure he's a gewaldige Talmud Chacham. But how do we know that Rabbeinu Yonah was a lamdin? Who knows? Which Masechta? Brachas, Talmid Rabbeinu Yonah. And which other Masechta there's a Perish of Rabbeinu Yonah? Who knows? One more Masechta which you have a Perish of Rabbeinu Yonah. Who said that? Right? Aliyah's the Rabbeinu Yonah. So obviously, it was a shtik lamdin as well. And Sefer Vayeira Rabbeinu Yonah writes, Im yevo orchim lebeisoi, Hachnasas lebeisoi b'seva punim yofes, umiyad bevoyim, yosem nefneim oichel. Don't wait. Sometimes a guest comes, you might be hungry, and you start schmoozing with them. What's your name? Where do you come from? What was your Bubba's name? Where were you born? Where are you going? And the guy's hungry. What's Haksta and cup? You know, give him food. So Rabbeinu Yonah says, "Miyad bevoim yosem lechol kifo omen bo oni v'lo yochal v'bosh lishol." He's ashamed to say, "My dear balabos, cut it out. You have some food for me? V'bosh lishol v'yitem lo lachmoi v'meimo v'sash yochal b'pona meirois v'af im yeh levovei otza v'daga yisachena meleboi b'fneihem v'yanachmeim b'dvorav." Engage, make them feel comfortable. ואף אם יהיו לו 1,000 עבודים, יתרחו בעצמו, כי מי לא נגודל כאברהם אבינו, ששימש למלוכם והויה לו כמה עבודים ושבוחה, שנאמר, אנשי בייסוי, ילידי בייסוי. So Rabbeinu Yonah says, Avraham Avinu was a very affluent person in his time. The Rambam writes in the beginning of Hilchos Avodas Kechovim, Nigbetzu elav alofim v'ravavois. He had so many Talmidim. And he's ill. Shlishi lemila. And it's hot outside. And he doesn't send anyone else. He is the one that wants to engage. So Rabbeinu Yonah says, don't send others. A famous story about Reb Chaim Oizer. So it was Sukkot, and some Choshev people came to visit Reb Chaim Oizer. He apologized, and he said, I'm ill, and I don't go to the sukkah because Mitzvah put him in a sukkah. But he gave them the keys, and he told them, down in the yard, the left side, please go into the sukkah, have some food, have some drinks. They go into the sukkah, and a few minutes later, Reb Chaim Oizer comes in. And they ask him, but didn't the Rav say that he's not feeling well, a Mitzvah put in a sukkah? So Reb Chaim Oizer says, yes, but I thought about it. HaMitzvah put him in a sukkah, but nowhere do we find a Mitzvah put him Hachnasas. So he says, I'm not here because of Mitzvah sukkah, but a Mitzvah is not put him Hachnasas. But wasn't he Makayim Hachnasas when he let them into a sukkah? It's his sukkah, it's his food. Obviously, Reb Chaim Oizer was aware of Rabbeinu Yonah in Sefer Vayeira. Yes, he was Makayim Hachnasas. But Avraham Avinu did the same. Avraham Avinu didn't feel well, and he didn't show them halachim, go in there. He engaged. And that's the story of Reb Chaim Oizer. Kadakemach. Who knows who's the Kadakemach? What else did he write? So there are two Rabbeinu Bachayas. One is the Choyves Alvoves, and the other one is Kadakemach, and he wrote Rabbeinu Bachaya the Torah. He also learned something from Avraham Avinu. V'ani merudim tovi beis bayis. Im einem boam etzlecha, at tochayev lachzor achareihem, ולבקש אותם בחוץ, עד שתמצאם, ותביאם לבייסכו, כי כן עשו אברהם, וירא ויורץ לקלוסם. So Rabbeinu Bachaya says, Hachnasas is not only if people come knocking on your door to let them in. Look for, initiate. The three Malachim didn't knock on Avraham Avinu's door. Vayeira v'yoretz l'krosam. He runs towards them and he asks them, do you have where to stay? Might you be hungry? Please come in. So this is another fundamental in Hachnasas Orchim that we learn from Avraham Avinu. So these are Makoros of the Rishonim. Now we go over to the Chofetz Chaim and Avos Chesed, source number 3. Ra'o re'inu שהתורה הרחיבו לספר בעניין Hachnasas Orchim של אברהם אבינו. איך הייתה? בכל פרוטוב. מה שלא מצינו כן בכל חלקי התורה שקיים אברהם אבינו שסיפרו רק בדרך כלל שקיים התורה. עקב אשר שמע אברהם בקולי וישמע שמעתי. That's the posuk from which Chazal derive and learn קיים כל התורה כולו עד שלא ניתנו. And therefore, writes the Chofetz Chaim, the reason is ביארו תורה ברחבו, כוונת התורה להורס לנו ללמד מאברהם אבינו איך להתנהג עם אורחים. So first of all he writes what the Kadakemach writes. He doesn't quote the Kadakemach. Initiate. Look for them. Bring them into your home and don't wait till somebody knocks on your door. He offers them water. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, sometimes it's not only about food. Do you need to wash? Do you need to shower? Do you need something? Are you cold? Are you hot? That is number 2. And Avraham Avinu says, Hisha'anu tachas Weiss, make them feel comfortable. Avraham Avinu says, it's hot outside. Do you want to sit in the shade? He probably put on the AC as well, if he had air conditioning. But we do. So the fundamental idea is, Hachnasas Orchim, make them feel as comfortable as you can. It's not like tzedakah in which you give them food, but we see Avraham Avinu offers water to wash their hands. Hisha'anu tachasu eitz. So that is the Chofetz Chaim going into great detail. Source number 4 is Shuvas Dvar Avram. He was the Rav in Kovno, one of the greatest Gedolim of his time. He died in the ghetto. And B'derech HaTeva. He wasn't killed by the Nazis. He passed away before the ghetto was liquidated and all were murdered. And he was buried. We don't know where his grave is, but he was buried in the ghetto in Kovno. Everybody knows who was this Goan HaTzadik Rebbe Sor Meir Meradin, the Chofetz Chaim. Hama'areach oni lesuda Shabbos, miyad bevoya mebeis HaKnesses torach lemaya lesoid, do kaima aniyem vela'alter over bebalta achar, vehi ha'ora yofo lecha oira. So he says, I heard that the Chofetz Chaim paskin, if you have guests, and maybe they're poor, and they're hungry, if you don't give them food immediately, you're over b'bal ta'achar. Because the Gemara at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah says, Bal ta'achar is not only by korbanos, it is by tzedakah as well. So by korbanos you have sholosh regolim. How much time do you have by tzedakah? And the Gemara says, Kaimi aniyim, if the poor people are here, you immediately have Bal Te'achar, and you need to give them now. So I heard that the Chofetz Chaim was machadish. If you have guests and they're poor, and you don't offer them food immediately, you might be over on a lav of Bal Te'achar. And the Dvar Avram writes, I don't think so. Vehi ha'ora yofa, aval afi she'enu oilem nizar b'zeh, ma'adarna bosa zechuto, the eina nechoino. And he writes, Bal Te'achar depends on minhag ha'olam. And what is your guest's expectation? So when the Oni stands before you and he stretches out his hand, he expects you to give him money. Sometimes these aniyim are a bit rude. You're in the middle of Birchas Kriya Shema, and you will put his hand in your face. I'm not allowed to be mafsik in the middle of Kriya Shema v'Berchaseo to give tzedakah. But the oni means to say, I don't have time. I'm a busy person. I need to catch the next minion downstairs. So when the oni stretches out his hand, that's Bal Tiacha. But when a person comes to your home, he doesn't expect, and he has no right to expect, that you're going to put everything aside. He's like part of your home. Take your time. So, is this a correct shemua that he heard or not? It is. Tofresh Lametet. Sharat Tziyun, that's the Mishnah Brura. Why would this halacha be in Hilchas Sukkah? Because in Hilchas Sukkah we have the din of Yeridas Geshamim. If it's raining outside, you don't need to sit in the Sukkah. So it's Leil Shabbos, it's raining outside. So the Mishnah Brura writes, you could wait some time, maybe it'll stop raining in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in a half hour. Al pi halacha, you could eat in your house. But if you very much want to eat in the sukkah, you could wait. But if you have guests and they might be poor, then you can't wait. So let's have a look at the Sharat Tziyun. If you're hungry and you're going to have tsar by waiting, it should stop raining, you don't need to wait. ואם מצטער פוטר, גם כן יוכל לאכול. ואפשר אוי דלעניין עניים דקיימי, אם יעקבי מלאכול, איסור אינה מעיקה. דהם אינם מחיובים לצייס כל הדייס, ואיקה חשש דבלת אחר. So he writes, yes. But I want to reconcile. I don't think it's a machlokes between the Dvar Avram and the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura deals with a situation in which it's raining. Al pi halacha, you don't have to wait. You want to wait because you want to be from. But other people don't wait. If it's raining, you put them. It's the put them in a sukkah. That is Bal Ta'acha. That doesn't mean that you come home Friday night from shul, you're not allowed to say Shalom Aleichem, you're not allowed to say Good Shabbos to your wife, and you're not allowed to bench your kinderlach, as many have a minig, because every second you're over on Bal Ta'acha. The Dvar Avram is right. It depends on normalcy, reasonability. You don't need to act strange because you have a guest. But you're not allowed to be from and wait 2 hours, it'll stop raining because you have a guest. One of my earliest recollections as a young boy, I don't remember how old I was, I think it was about 8. My father was always a very, very friendly person, and he loved people. We always had guests. And sometimes my mother was a little annoyed because she's the Balas Abayis, and she used to tell my father, you bring guests, but I need to know in advance because I'm embarrassed if I don't have much to offer them. But my father, he went to shul, and he always picked up guests. He never knew in advance who was going to come. He invited them all. Some of them actually came. So my father was a big, big Hachnasas oirach. So the Dvar Avram says, you don't need to be strange, but you have no right to be from. So I said, one of my earliest recollections, my father had a guest, a business associate. He wasn't from, he didn't seem to be from, but he was Jewish, and my father invited him. He thought he's coming to a meal, and it was Beleila Seder. And my older brothers were already Lamdonim. And my father says one word and another word and a chiddush and a pshetel, and the kids engage. And I was sitting right across this gentleman, and I had such rachmanis. He was such a nebuch, sitting there. And finally, when it came to matzah, He started smiling. He didn't know what's waiting for him. Matzah, morer, koirach. When we finally got to the meal, I think he was totally exhausted. So you have no right to be frum if you have guests. And therefore, you want to wait till it should stop raining, you can't do that. If you're alone with your family, okay. But if you have guests, you can't be frum and wait till it should stop raining because it might take an hour or two. But when you come home from shul, doesn't mean that you need to put everything aside and you're over baltachar every second. So let me share with you a story that's not printed anywhere. And I heard it from my son-in-law, Rabbi Rosenbaum. Some of you know Rabbi very well. Anybody that needs a minchas osher knows that I am not the one to call. My son-in-law is the one to call. He's the biggest bookie in the world in minchas osher. When I want to know where the minchas osher writes something, I call him. And he knows better than me. And he's an Einikel of the Pittsburgh Aruv, Rabbi Avram Binyamin Zilberberg. Was a Ger Chosed, and he came from Poland, and he was Rav in Pittsburgh. And he traveled from America to Lithuania, and he spent a Leil Shabbos in the Chofetz Chaim's home. And he writes, and this is a story that they know in the family. Chofetz Chaim came home from shul. First thing, he made Kiddush, and they washed. And he, as a chassid, was shocked. And he asked the Chofetz Chaim, the Rav doesn't say Shalom Aleichem. It's a minig, the Malachim come and you say Shalom Aleichem. I didn't know that the Chofetz Chaim had a sense of humor. And the Chofetz Chaim told him, the Malachim aren't hungry and they're not rushing anywhere. They will patiently wait, but my guests might be hungry. So whenever I have guests, the Chofetz Chaim said, the first thing I make Kiddush and we wash, and then I say Shalom Aleichem. And that is what he did. After B'tzias Apas, he said Shalom Aleichem. I'm a bit disappointed with Rav Zilberberg because I would like to know what else did he say besides Shalom Aleichem. If we already tell the story, why didn't you tell the whole story? Did he say Askinas Sedoso of the Riyah Kodesh that all the Hasidim say? I would like to know. I assume that he said Eishes Chayil, but in every Hasidish Siddur we have a beautiful Tefillah Rabbeinu Shel Olam, and in Zmiras Minchas Osher there are a few Perushim on that Tefillah. I would like to know exactly what the Chofetz Chaim said and what he didn't, but didn't tell. All he tells is this beautiful thought. The Chofetz Chaim said, whenever I guest, first thing we wash and we make a moitzi, and the Malachim patiently wait because they're not hungry. So today we discussed some details about Hachnasas Orchim that we learned from Avraham Avinu, but the fundamental chiddush that I said at the beginning of this year, which is an important yisoid, the gather of a mitzvah derabanan sheyesh lo ikar min haTorah, and we spoke about all the mitzvahs that are gemilas chodem begufay and tefillah according to the Ramban. So last week we spoke a bit about Asara Nisyonis Shenisnas Avraham Avinu, and at the end of this week's Parshas is the ultimate Nisoyan, the most difficult of them all, which is Akedas Yitzchak. I mentioned last week that throughout the ages, thousands upon thousands of Jews were Moisei Nefesh, Al Kedushas Hashem, almost in every generation. And it happened so many times. And B'Shas HaChurban, the Gemara in Gittin tells the story of a Jewish mother that sacrificed 7 children Al Kiddush Hashem. So what was so special and unique about Akedas Yitzchak? So my first comment is, yes, many others had that the same Nisoyan, but it is only b'koicho shel Avraham Avinu that all the others could do it. And that is the thought we shared last week. But I want to speak specifically about Akedas Yitzchak. Kedusha Namadei, there's a machlokes in the Gemara. When are we called bonim and when are we called avodim? The Vayeira Kodesh in Parshas Bahar says there's no contradiction at all between the two. We are always bonim and we are always avodim. We love HaKadosh Baruch Hu because we're bonim, and children love their father. We are in awe and we fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu because we're avodim. Dechilo Orchim, Ahavo Vayeira are the reflection, the manifestation of bonim and avodim. What is the difference between a child and a slave? Avodim are not expected to ask questions. You do your duty. That is what we expect of you. Don't ask questions. Anybody here from London? Anybody here visited London? In Trafalgar Square, there's a high column and a gentleman standing at the top of the column with 1 foot. You know who that is? I'm happy that you don't know. Usually I'm not happy that you don't know. Oh, yeah. What was his first name? What was he? A naval admiral. One of the famous battles of the British Navy. And his saying is, ours is not to ask why. Ours is to do and die. Okay, nice rhyme. So an Eved is not expected to ask questions. A soldier doesn't ask questions. You do your duty. You're told what to do, and you execute. But a child is entitled to ask his father, and children always do. Kids are entitled to ask questions. Avraham Avinu writes the Rambam in Perik Yud of Hilchos Shuvah was Gdoil Oyhavei Hashem. And the Rambam says, Loi kol hachachomim achieved the madrega of Avas Hashem. Avraham did. And the Novi Yeshayahu calls us Zera Avraham Ohavi. So Avraham was the ultimate child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, take your son and kill him and slaughter him for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Avraham is shocked. Because Avraham taught the entire world about Emunah, about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he was the first to fight Avodah Zorah. And over there, Avodah Zorah used to sacrifice their children for their gods, for their false gods. And Avraham Avinu remembers the Gemara in Megillah Daf Dalet, a posuk in Novi, Asher lo amarti velo tzivisi velo also alibi. And the Gemara says that refers to Yiftach and to others who sacrifice their children. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want this. And Avraham is shocked. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me to sacrifice my son. I will become the laughingstock of the entire world. For years I've been preaching and teaching that Chas v'Sholem, you don't do this. You serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Torah, with Tefillah, with Kriya Shema, with Avodah Shebelev. You don't slaughter children for Avodah Zorah. It would be expected that Avraham would ask, Rabbeinu Shalom, did I hear correctly? Is this really what you want me to do? Could you please reconsider, what will the world say if I do this? Avraham asks nothing. And that is why the Malach says, Ato yodati ki yarei Elokim ato. That you are a oihev, we knew that. Yeshaya Novi already testified, Zer Avraham ohavi. But the fact that Avraham gets such a shocking mitzvah, and he doesn't ask. Because an Eved doesn't ask questions. And Avraham knows when to be a son and when to be an Eved. And the Malach says, you passed the test. Ato yodati ki yarei Elokim ato. Because as an oihev, What would be more natural than Avraham to ask the Ribono Shel Olam, you promised me ki v'Yitzchak yikura l'chazora. Are you retracting what you promised me? Freiknish kan shailas. He doesn't ask. Atu yodati ki yorei Eloki ematu. An additional thought. The Yismach Yisrael. Who knows who was the Yismach Yisrael? Alexander Rebbe. And he quotes Reb Itzekel Volker. And the Polish tzaddikim didn't give very lengthy drushes, not like me. 2 or 3 words, and they spoke volumes. So the Yismach Yisrael brings Reb Itzekel Volker. Vayeira, v'hinei ayel acher, an andere ayel. He said 3 words. Ayel acher, an andere ayel. And the Yismach Yisrael explains. Avraham Avinu, Merav Dveikis, was like a malach. And there was no human emotion in his heart at that time. And to him, it was like he sees Shnei Eilim. Yitzchak is Ayel number 1, and suddenly he sees Ayel Acher, and that's Ayel number 2. That's the thought of Reb Itzekel Volker. Do you recall a posuk Ayel Acher? Is there such a posuk? Vayeira, v'hinei Ayel Achar. Not Acher, Achar. And the kavanah, the posuk is, it's a posuk mesuras. V'achar, and after that, Vayeira, v'hinei Ayel. So it's not Ayel Acher. Whenever I quote Chassidish Torah, I say, Chassidish Vertlech are always rochik min apshat ve'korev el alev. Probably the Itzekel Volker and the Yismach Yisrael knew that it's not Ayel Acher, but Ayel Achar. That's the word. That's the thought. But this description is not the correct one. Because the Medrash says, tears were pouring out of the eyes of Avraham, and Avraham's tears fell into Yitzchak's tears. Merachmenusoi shel Abba. It was a tragic sight. It was a heartbreaking sight. And Avraham bitterly cries, and Yitzchak cries. V'halev sas v'sameach l'asei sotzoin aviyem shebeshamayim. That was the Nesoin. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham, Kachnu es bincha, and he's terrified. And he asks, which one? I have 2 sons. Es yechidcha. And he still hopes. And he says, both are yechidim. Ze yochel le'imoi v'ze yochel le'imoi. Asher ohavto. And he still clings on to a thread, and he says, I love them both. Es Yitzchak. He is the one that I want you to sacrifice. And I wrote long ago, Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham, if you heard the word of Reb Itzekel Volker, ignore it. It's not what I want. I don't want you to be a malach. Because then it wouldn't be an Nesoin at all. Es bincha, es yechidcha, asher ahavta. With all the love you could muster. And Avraham Avinu had a huge heart, full of love. He loved the world. Titan chesed l'Avraham. He was a moida chesed. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, with all the love you could put into your heart, and that is how I want you to sacrifice your child. That was the Nesoin. And that's what he did. And tears were pouring out of his eyes. Valev sas v'sameach. That contradiction, only Avraham Avinu could stand that Nesoin, and that was the Nesoin. The Imre Emes, the Gerer Rebbe, lost a child Friday afternoon. And it was Erev Shabbos Parshas Vayeira. His son's name was Yitzchak. His name was Avram Mordechai. And Shabbos he said this Torah. about kachno es bincho es yechidcho asher ahavto v'halei Hashem la'olam. This was the thought, and strange phenomena. His name was Avram, his son's name was Yitzchak, and he passed away Erev Shabbos, Parshas Vayeira. That was the Nasoyan of Avram Avinu. And that is why we ask, whenever we say the Akedah, Kishem shekovash Avram Avinu es lachmav, lasis l'tzoynchu belev avsholem, kein yichbishu rachmechu es kaschu miolenu, v'tisnai gimonu b'milas hachesed. And Akedah Yitzchak is such a huge zgula. We should all be zoicher, Achmon Eid kol zchus edi Yitzchak Akedah, and zchus avois, begal avois to shiabonim v'sovi geula levnei b'neihem b'meiru v'yomeinu amen. Have a beautiful Shabbos.